Today's question is, which famous person is buried in New Zealand? This is a tricky one. Let's see if you can figure it out. Here are your clues. Number 1. He was born in 1824. That means that he was alive during the time of the Mayflower. I was alive then too, but you know what I mean. Number 2. He was related to literature. He wrote books. His writing was quite popular in his day. In fact, these days we might call him a celebrity author. Number 3. His death was quite scandalous. It involved a woman and a weapon. Ooh, spicy. And number 4. There is a museum dedicated to him today. Let me know your guesses in the comments below. Is it Charles Dickens? Is it Shakespeare? How about Agatha Christie? Who could it be? Well, let's dive into the answer with some facts and history. We are looking for someone famous who died a violent death and who has a museum in their honor. So this person must have been pretty famous. If they were a minor author with only a small handful of fans, I doubt there would be a museum dedicated to them today. The year that he was born, 1824, gives us a hint as to which era he was from. Since he was born before the Mayflower, he would have been an author from either the Victorian era or earlier. This rules out many famous authors such as Conan Doyle or Agatha Christie, but there are still many famous people from the Victorian era that fit the description. So we'll need more clues. Clue number 2 states that his writing was quite popular in his day. And so that leads us to our first name, Wilkie Collins. Wilkie Collins was an English novelist. He is often called the father of the sensation novel, which is a type of story that focuses on crime and criminal trials. During his life, he was very successful and his books were bestsellers. Today, however, he is not as well known. There is some debate as to whether or not he should be better known, and some people are trying to revive interest in his books. He did write The Moonstone, which is considered to be the first English detective novel. So that's pretty cool. But unfortunately, despite being a great author, his books aren't as well known today. And so I don't think he is the person we're looking for. Not to mention there isn't a museum dedicated to him. So he's not our guy. So let's move on to our next name, Charles Dickens. Now Dickens is much more well known even today. Many people have read A Christmas Carol or Oliver Twist. And of course, his work is way more popular in the UK than here in the States. Sadly, we don't have nearly as many museums dedicated to him over here. However, we do have one in London and another in his hometown of Portsmouth, so it looks like he fits clue number 4. In addition, Dickens was incredibly popular during his life, so that also fits. The only thing that doesn't really fit is the scandalous death part. Charles Dickens died at the age of 58 after suffering a stroke. While this may seem a bit scandalous to us since he was a very famous man at the time, it was actually quite common for people to die of strokes and other illnesses. So it doesn't really stand out as a scandalous death. Furthermore, his fame at the time made his death quite public and widely discussed. Back then, the internet and media was newspapers, so the discussion of his death would have been extensive. However, it wasn't a scandalous death, just a sad death of a very well-known man. Thus, I think Charles Dickens is not the person we're looking for. Moving on to our next name, Thomas Hardy. Hardy was also a very popular author in Victorian England. His novels often centered around rural England and focused on the lives of peasants. He's most famous for The Mayor of Casterbridge, Far from the Madding Crowd, and Tess of the D'Urbervilles. All 3 of these titles sound scandalous, and Hardy's novels were indeed quite scandalous for their time period. They often explored themes of sexuality, class, and fate. Because of this, they were considered to be quite controversial. In addition, he is often remembered for his pessimistic view of love and life. Unfortunately, while he was popular in his day, he fell out of style and had a bit of a revival in the 60s when people started reading him again. He was never super popular like Dickens. So I don't think that he is the person we're looking for. Again, there's no museum dedicated to him, so that kind of rules him out. So how about we move on to Oscar Wilde? Now, Oscar Wilde was also well known during his time period. He wasn't just a writer but a poet and a playwright. He was known for his wit and for his flamboyant style. He wrote The Picture of Dorian Gray and The Importance of Being Earnest, so he certainly could have fit the bill. However, his death isn't very scandalous. He died of cerebral meningitis after contracting meningitis. This was after he spent some time in prison. He was put in jail after he had an affair with a young man and then sued when he tried to clear his name. So tragic. And sadly, he died as a result of the stress and illness that developed as a result of going to prison. While this may seem scandalous, especially in the time period that he lived, the cause of his death is simply illness and thus it doesn't fit our clue. In addition, there is a museum dedicated to him in Dublin, Ireland, and one in the US. So while he does fit many of the clues, his death was simply due to illness and there are 2 museums dedicated to him. So he's not our guy. Let's go to our next name, Bram Stoker. Bram Stoker is the author of The Legend of Dracula. As such, he certainly fits the description of a famous author who was well known during his time period. However, his death is once again not particularly scandalous. He died after battling throat cancer, so unfortunately he doesn't fit our clue. Finally, let's discuss Rudyard Kipling. Kipling was a British author who was known for writing The Jungle Book as well as many poems. He was awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1906, which tells us that he must have been pretty well known during his time period. He wrote stories about adventure, colonialism, and war. His most famous works include The Jungle Book, Kim and the Man Who Would Be King. So he certainly fits the bill of a famous author during the Victorian era. Now let's look at his death. Was it scandalous? Well, he died after being struck by a slow-moving vehicle. While this seems like a modern form of death, back then they didn't have very many cars and so the slow-moving vehicle was likely a horse. So his death was most likely quite quick and almost certainly not very painful. So unfortunately, this doesn't fit our clue. So who is the famous author who was killed in a scandalous manner? Well, it was none other than Robert Louis Stevenson. You may recognize him as the author of Treasure Island and The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Both of these books are definitely considered to be quite scandalous for their time periods, and so he certainly fits our clue. He also fits our other clues. He was a famous author who was alive during the Victorian era and there is a museum dedicated to him in Edinburgh, Scotland. His death was indeed very scandalous for its time period. He died after being stabbed by his wife in a fit of passion. The details are rather graphic and I won't share them here, but if you'd like to learn more, feel free to Google it. Needless to say, this was a scandalous death in Victorian England, and it is certainly what makes him stand out among other famous authors from that time period. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing, and thank you for watching.